I was thinking about what you said, that there's all these untapped potential in terms of gifts and skills that don't get used if you're not leveraging volunteers on that side of the house. And we've seen it in our church where it's benefited other ministries. So for example, with our church, we're not the size where every ministry can get the talent and skill of our comms and graphics and all of that. But because of volunteers, they kind of do.
Well, this is season 3, episode 38 of the Missional Marketing Podcast. My name is Bart Blair. I'm the co-host of the show, and it's my privilege to welcome you to another episode. If you're new to the podcast, we want to welcome you and let you know that the reason that we produce this podcast is to help your church grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. We put out a new episode just about every Friday, and just in case you haven't yet subscribed, make sure that you do that. Whatever your favorite podcasting platform is, if it's Apple Podcasts or Google or Stitcher, or Spotify, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And if you happen to be watching on our YouTube channel, make sure that you subscribe, ring the bell so that you get notified of future episodes as they are available. But also make sure that you scroll down to the comments section on the episode and answer the question that we post there. Every week we post it on YouTube, the podcast episodes onto YouTube. And we post a question, we pin it to the top because we would love to engage with you there just to get your feedback, to see what's working for you, what's not, and just love to know how you're processing the content that you're hearing or watching on the podcast. Today, really excited about our guest. I'm going to just go straight out and call our guest a friend of mine. His name is Nick Blevins. Nick is a pastor at a church in the Baltimore, Maryland area called Community Christian Church. He oversees the children's ministry, the family ministry at that church. He also happens to be over all of their digital strategies. So Nick and I have an opportunity to work together as their church uses missional marketing services to reach more people. And ultimately, over the time, Nick and I have just found that we have a lot in common. And so I love hanging out with Nick on Zoom calls from time to time to talk about their strategies. And one of our most recent calls, he told me that he was releasing a book. And I was like, what is your book called? And he said, it's called the Volunteer Playbook. And I was like, Nick, we have to have you on our podcast so that we can talk about this. If you've been listening to our podcast for any length of time, you know that this is something that Jason and I have talked about a lot. We've had other guests talk about it. Oh, and by the way, we have some upcoming episodes with some other guests in which we're going to be talking about it. We would love to see you as a church communications leader build more teams within your ministry and not be the one that owns everything all the time. And there's a lot of reason for that, and we're going to get into some of that in this week's episode. Again, we appreciate you tuning into the show. We hope that you find the content helpful, and we hope that you'll share it with somebody if you do. So without any further delay, here's the CEO of Missional Marketing, Jason Hamrock, and our interview with Nick Blevins.
Well, hey, Nick, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I feel like we finally have the weather here in Maryland that you get most of the year in Arizona. So
and
I'm
we're
happy.
just we're on the cusp of being really, really, really hot. So
yeah, we don't get that, which is fine with me. But I like, I like the warmer weather. Summer's my favorite season, so I'm doing well. It's coming. We're almost
Tell
there.
our audience where you're located.
I'm at a church north of Baltimore, Maryland, and we live a little bit even north of that at Community Christian Church, where I'm the next gen pastor. And we helped start this church as a church plant 17 years ago.
Really? Okay. I thought I forgot about that. That's awesome. That's really
I remember it. It's like, Bart understands this church planning. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember making children's ministry check-in tags at 1 a.m. before the church launched in 7 hours or whatever. And it also feels like it was 40 years ago. Like I feel like I've aged much more than 17 years from the process.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But those are fun times, right? Like great memories.
It was awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, tell the audience a little bit more about your story, how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah. So I grew up attending church ever since I was 2, never intended to work for a church. It probably didn't help that I married the pastor's daughter, and then she didn't think she was marrying anybody that was going to be a pastor either. So both of us did not think that was going to be our life. But as I was graduating college, working for Northrop Grumman Mission Systems as a systems administrator, I thought that was going to be my life, doing project management or something like that. And I did love that. But in the young adult years, I just had different opportunities to lead at my home church and loved that, really enjoyed it. Still didn't think I was going to work for a church. In fact, when this church that I'm a part of we heard about it, we had been praying about new church plants in our area. We felt like we needed more new churches who would reach people who were far from God. And so when we heard about this church, we thought, maybe this is the answered prayer. Let's check it out. And it was like, we went to the information meeting. It was like, oh my gosh, this is what we've prayed for a year and a half.
Wow.
And they needed a kids pastor part-time. I thought I might be able to do that. I've mostly done youth ministry stuff. And my at the time, my youth pastor had become a pastor in the area and asked me about being his youth pastor. So that was the first time that I ever thought about that. And I was very intrigued by it. The only exception though was like the church he was at was a healthier but still somewhat traditional church, kind of like what I'd come from, and it really was looking to be a part of something that was maybe different, But that was the first time I had that idea that maybe I would like working for a church. And now I look back, and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I would have done anything else. Like, it's been amazing.
Yeah,
it's been hard.
Funny how God's his plan for your life really does play out when you just you're obedient, you say yes.
Yep. It's one of those few times where I feel like, yep, I do think God was calling us to this, which is really cool.
Yep. So you've had all these years of working in the church, and it brings us to our the topic of today, what we want to talk about, and that is you wrote a book, and the title of the book is The Volunteer Playbook for Churches. And I got to tell you, listening to the book, I was shaking my head, going, "Darn it! I wish I had this book when I was on staff at my church," because I worked at a church and I was in the communications, right? That's my background. And we didn't have a playbook for how you find, recruit, find them, recruit them, train them, engage with them, keep them, volunteers. It's just, hey, connect with these people because they want to volunteer. And then you're like, well, okay, and I failed at it because I didn't really have a playbook. So talk to us a little bit about, why'd you write it and who do you think it's going to help? And just kind of go into the details of this new book that you wrote.
Yeah. And it's like 10 years in the making. I think good writers probably don't take 10 years to write a book, but when you're not super disciplined like myself, it took 10 years. So in some ways it even changed probably a little bit in terms of like its goal or purpose or whatever. Originally it was kind of like you said, I wish I'd had that playbook, when I started out. I feel like 90% of the book is stuff I've learned from other leaders, right? Like very little of it is new from me. But I wanted to put it all in one resource so that someone like myself could use that to recruit and build. And really the original idea was kind of, volunteerism is impacted by so many things in the church. I mean, hundreds of factors impact volunteerism, whether positively or negatively. And a lot of times we think it's just one thing. Like, we just need one more announcement. We just need one ministry fair drive in the lobby, or we just need whatever it is. And those things can be good, but that's one thing among hundreds of factors. And so the idea originally was, how can I help church leaders build a healthy volunteer culture, like from the ground up? But over the years of I made a course first before it was ever a book. So I got to experience like how people engage with the content, how they applied it in their church. And I learned I need to prioritize recruitment on the front end, get that going, and then they'll have some time to focus on the rest. And so that's kind of what the book became, was here's how to recruit, build your team a little bit. Now we can go to work on the foundation. Now we can build a structure that, will help your team thrive. And then at the end, there's kind of like some bonus recruitment ideas. It's kind of the things that probably people want to use most, like the quick, easy answers. I save those for the end, like let's build the good foundation first, then those will be more effective.
So I was just going to say, I feel like you're right. People want to get to the how-to before they really get to the why. And one of the things that you do unpack quite a bit in the book is the concept of culture and values and those sorts of things. And I think that a lot of church leaders, ministry leaders, fail to realize that you're not just recruiting people or inviting people to do a certain job or a certain task, but you're inviting them into a team and into a culture. And the more time and energy and effort that you can put into investing in the culture that you have in your volunteer teams, the easier it is to actually get people to say yes, because the people who are serving feel appreciated and they're growing in their faith and they feel like they're contributing to something that matters. Why don't you speak into that just a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And I feel like, so that in some ways that was the core of the book in the beginning. It was like, let's get your mission established, your vision, your strategy, your culture, Now let's talk about roles and the structure. Again, like building it, like if you were building a house from the ground up. But I knew like that's kind of boring and also not urgent. Like nobody's like getting a book and thinking, this is going to help me this week. You know what I mean? So I put it in there. And here's what's funny, guys. I have no idea, but it's a self-published book. I do strongly believe that if I'd gone with like a traditional publisher, they'd have cut that whole thing out. They'd have been like, and part of me thought about that too, but it's like, is it a different book? It's not that much. So, it's in there. But what you said is true though. Culture especially is so important. Like if you start recruiting a bunch of people, but the team isn't healthy, well, they're just not going to last long, right? Yeah. They're going to come on or come off. If you recruit a bunch of people and maybe it's like healthy, but it's like kind of disorganized or it's not clear what the purpose is, again, people just won't stay long. And so culture is absolutely huge. I say that it's not the most important of mission, vision, strategy, and culture, but it's the one you feel the most. So like in some ways it almost is the most important because like if I went to your church this Sunday, in 15 minutes, I would have a sense of the culture. Like, is this fun? Is it loose? Is it welcoming? Is it formal? Is it informal? And like I wouldn't know anything about your mission, vision, or strategy, but in 15 minutes, I probably have a good sense of the culture. And I feel like it's the same with volunteer culture. So simple things like volunteers that wear the same shirts, or a volunteer room where they get snacks and drinks and candy and can rest, or huddles, like where volunteers get together for 30 minutes before the service. Things like that can help establish like that healthy volunteer culture where people get in and they're like, oh, this is great. Like, I can't believe that wasn't part of this before. I mean, and the perfect scenario is where it's so good, people talk about it. You know what I mean? Like outside, to other people that don't serve yet. And then it just helps build. But if it's bad, it's all bad. You know what I mean? Like if your culture is not good, even the good things don't seem good, right? Like it could be working fine, but the culture makes it feel worse.
So if I'm serving in a church and there is an unhealthy culture, what do I do about that?
Good question. Well, and there's probably levels to that. Like if it's the church culture is unhealthy, not just your ministry volunteer. And if the church culture is unhealthy, I do think it starts at the top. Like how do we help the church establish a new healthy culture? But what I think the plan is, I don't want to say the plan. There's a lot of things you could do, but what I would do would be the same. The only difference is, am I doing it church-wide or just within my ministry, within my volunteers? But I love the idea of establishing like culture statements or values, as long as they're not like boring or as Pat Lencioni would say, permission to play. Like don't use value. Like that people may hate that I say this, but like as a church, don't say we value the Bible and Jesus and prayer and evangelism. Like Patrick Lencioni would say, those are permission to play. You're a church. You should value those things. I like values that I worked with a church where one of them was we give ministry away, meaning we empower others to lead and decide and give ministry away. Or one of our church's values is we're not just consumers, we're contributors. So we want to have this value that we don't just come here to get, we also come here to give. Another one of ours is we own our own faith journey. Again, just trying to get people to get that. So I think if you can come up, like Elevation Church is a church that has the code. I'm working with a church now. They have something they call house rules, and they got 7 of those. And you can come up with whatever you want. But I like that church that has the house rules. For example, you can really sense it. Like I've read them before I ever got there. They have them on the wall, in the one building at their one campus that I was at. And man, the pastor exhibits it completely. The staff, and you can just feel it. And it's like, and I think culture is ultimately the people, right? So like, I mean, that's going to happen whether you're intentional or not. It's just how we do things here is kind of how I say it. But if you can establish some statements, some values like they did, repeat them over and over again, then you can kind of create the one you want. But the other part of the equation that's much more complicated is you have to get rid of unhealthy parts of the culture, which sometimes means people, firing volunteers, staff, which is not fun. Nobody wants to talk about that. But like a healthy culture can't happen if there's huge toxic portions of it, that we haven't addressed. But I think most churches, fortunately, aren't there. They're in we just haven't been clear about it. So it's kind of become whatever it is. So if you can get clear about it, establish some phrases, and repeat them and use them regularly, celebrate when it happens, you'll start to create the culture you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so true, especially when you recognize that there are certain ministries and people in those ministries, the staff people who are the temptation is I'll just do it myself. And I'm just going to program. And I was always fighting back going, no, you can't do that. You gotta hand it off and expect it to be maybe not as professional as you would like it to be, but it's way more authentic.
Yeah.
And in some people just have a hard time grasping it because I think they think it's like, well, it's job security. I got to have a really powerful program. And it's like, I don't know about that. So otherwise, you're going against what you're saying in the book.
Yeah, we said, you're speaking to like something that our staff has said, and I don't remember if it's our executive pastor or our lead pastor that first phrased this, but it's really good. His idea was like, if you're leading volunteers and you're giving authority away, tasks, responsibilities, you have to be okay that it's going to be 80% at first. And if you can just get 80%, give it away. And the 80% is hard for a lot of us. And especially people listen to this podcast. A lot of people listen to this podcast, create things. They have, you know what I mean? And so there's like this, 80%. 80% feels like a lot worse than what it sounds, even when we say it out loud. And I've witnessed it. We've had our large group on our kids stage be 80%. And it's like, this feels like 40%. You know what I mean? But then over time, you just got to remember we were 40% or whatever it was, so you just got to get over time. They learn, they develop. And my thing is, I feel like a lot of times it can become 120%. Like it can get better than it was when we did it. But you just got to be patient, be willing to start. And I do think there's some kind of floor. So I don't know if 80% is the right number. Don't give it to somebody who's not gifted at it at all. But, if they're just like we were and they just need to grow, hand that thing off to a volunteer, help them develop, and, it'll get back to 100% or more. You just got to be okay with the 80% for a little while.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, I think you got to assume, if you look at biblical principles about empowerment, I don't think that the Apostle Paul was concerned about Timothy only being 80% the pastor he was, right?
Sure.
The Apostle Paul was the Apostle Paul, and Timothy is not, right?
Good luck, Timothy.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things at play when you have a strong culture of empowerment, is that you also have to bring in a culture of improvement. So people who are being empowered to do something, they're given the reins and the opportunity to lead, to exercise their gifts and their talents. That's great, but you also need to have a healthy culture of evaluation and a healthy culture of improvement. And, Jason and I have the opportunity to sit alongside churches that are working to improve their church communications all the time. And, you don't improve if you don't evaluate. And as ministry leaders, we know that one of the things that we're called to do is equip the saints of the work for ministry. And that's not all just spiritual stuff. In the space of church comms and creativity, it is a matter of empowering people who have gifts and talents in the area of copywriting, of photography, of videography, of video editing, of songwriting, of, social media content creation, whatever the case might be. There's so many different places. Nick, you and I were talking offline before we started recording, and Jason, you and I have had a handful of conversations about this with other podcast guests, is that church communications leaders simply should do a better job of building teams of volunteers in their church to perform the work of the ministry. And it shouldn't all fall on the shoulders and the pressure of that comms director. But Nick, you're right on the money. The people that are listening to this podcast, the people that we sit across Zoom calls from day in, day out, they're all really high achievers. They want to do things really, really well with excellence. And it's partly because of the way that God has wired them. And part of it is because they want to serve their leaders well, right? And they feel like if I don't deliver 100% all the time, I'm not serving my leaders well. So I'll get off that side. That soapbox there. Yeah, you're right. It is. That's a stressful way to live, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, I imagine
it for years is hard.
I'm putting you all on the spot. Out of 10 comms directors, how many of them use volunteers well?
Oh,
just guessing.
Maybe one.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So
and part
hard.
of that, right? Yeah, part of that's probably because unlike kids ministry, see, I always say kids ministry, you have to be some level of a good leader because you can't be in every room. Like it's just impossible. Right. Student ministry, depending on the size, you actually could have a room of 60 students, keep them in one big room, and you can handle it with like 4 volunteers. Yep. Not lead it well, but you can handle it. And that's a lot of churches. Comms is like almost another level because you're creating things that many people consume, but one person you could almost, I don't think it's good, but you could almost get by with just you. never using a volunteer. And that's probably not good for the church, but you can get it done, right?
You could, and it, actually in anything operation wise, right?
Yeah.
Accounting or HR or what, IT,
Sure.
anything on that side of the house. That's why I said when I was on that side of the house, I never had a playbook. So I'm just like, darn it. I wish I would have had this playbook. And I'm telling you, comm directors, you need to get this book. And because there is talent in your congregation that God has gifted and you're not tapping into it. I'm telling you, it's stressful to stay at that high level all the time. It's much easier to keep it down to 80%. By the way, most people don't even recognize or notice it. None of the kids go,
true.
It used to be better back when you guys were programming it. Now that you got volunteers doing it, I don't know if I like this, says the fourth grader.
Yeah.
Never, ever.
No.
Right? They don't care about that. So I say come down a little bit and be realistic.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I mean, like I was thinking about what you said, that there's all these untapped potential in terms of gifts and skills that don't get used if you're not leveraging volunteers on that side of the house. And we've seen in our church where it's benefited other ministries. So, for example, with our church, we're not the size where every ministry can get the talent and skill of our comms and graphics and all of that. But because of volunteers, they kind of do on the social media side, even on the graphic side. One of our volunteers actually moved out of state. She lived here in Maryland, was part of our church for the longest time. Yep. She leads our kids' social media. She does all that. Yeah. And she moved to Nashville, and I don't know how long this is going to last, but she still does our kids' social media as a volunteer. And she's very particular about it. Like, I don't think she could ever hand it off at 80%, guys. She's very particular about it. But it's great because like her percentage is, I mean, she took it from our 20 and, raised it to 120 or something like that. Yeah. But that's an example of some people love that. And then I don't even know how, I mean, she's probably not even spending 2 hours a week. And, at one point I gave her the freedom when she was leaving. It's like, you might probably want to do this for whatever church you're going to be a part of there. But she's like, no, I want to keep it for now. I'm like, I'm not fighting it because it's amazing. Okay. So yeah, if you want to do it. But that's an example of like, if we weren't using volunteers, what would happen is it just wouldn't even happen. We wouldn't have separate kids social that was well done and all those things. And volunteers have made that possible.
And there's something else that I think is important. When I was on staff at my church, we kind of went from you're a member to, and we kind of scratched that word because that felt exclusive. We said you're an owner. You're an owner of this church. Yeah. And that's true, right? Because the church is a body of believers. And because we give to it, we're an owner of it. And so that really levels the playing field, staff to volunteers. We're all equal. And when you can mentally go there with, this is just my observation, when you can mentally go there, that empowers people that they're an owner of it. And they're going to bring more than just, I don't have to, I'm a volunteer. I choose not to show up today. Yep. Well, then you're failing your business that you own, right? And so that's just kind of a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, that's like the think like an owner, not a renter, is like one of those phrases that it's in another book, I believe, that's great about volunteers. And actually one of our staff values is think like an owner for that same reason. Because like it'd be easy as a staff person in whatever department to overlook something. Whereas if you thought like an owner, you wouldn't overlook anything. Like you'd care about that piece of trash. I did it. You all know who Jeff Henderson is. Used to be one of the campus pastors of North Point and written some great books. One time when I got to interview Jeff Henderson for my podcast, we're walking. They're doing construction in the building there to expand the student space. And we're walking. We're going to do this interview at the Gwinnett Church building. And we're walking from one place to the other. And Jeff, leans over and picks like up a mint wrapper off the ground. And I happen to know from knowing Jeff a little bit and other people that know him that that's just who he is. Like that's he's talked about that kind of thing. But it was fun for me to see it in action. Like Jeff was the owner. I mean, he was the pastor of that campus, but he would do that even if he was the lowest level, so to speak, employee in the whole organization because he always thought like an owner. And I think that's important.
Lead by example.
And own good. And here's the thing, I guess a lot of owners do everything, which is not great. But a good owner doesn't, right? So think like an owner is also, how can I empower volunteers?
Dave Ramsey uses the term treadmill operator for the owner who does everything. When you're a treadmill operator, you're on a treadmill and that thing runs and you can never get off. And you leave the treadmill when you actually have the opportunity to begin empowering other people to do some of the things that you do, training, equipping. And I think the same thing is true in ministry, right? If you're the one doing all the work all the time, it's like being on a treadmill because Sunday is always coming. There hasn't been a week yet since our calendar was invented that we just skipped a Sunday. We skip a February 29th every
Every
3 years in a row.
3 out of 4 years, yeah.
Right? Yeah, 3 out of 4 years. But we don't skip Sundays. Even if it falls on a Sunday, they just move the day. It's still a Sunday, right? So there's the tyranny of the urgent, and I think there's just a lot of wisdom in what you're saying there, Nick. I want to push into something else in the book. I'm just going to say I've only read the first half. I've already recommended it to about 28 different people.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Just because here's why I think people need to get the book, because it is really, really practical. You obviously lead the children's ministry, family ministries in your church, but what our listeners don't know, because you didn't mention this earlier, is that you also oversee the digital strategies in your church. And so that's how we know each other, because we meet regularly and talk about your digital strategies as a church. So you have your head and your hands around a lot of different things. First half of the book, I'm about maybe 60% of the way through so far, is really practical in terms of establishing a culture, recruitment, ways that we're getting volunteers to serve on our team. I haven't read the last 40% of the book yet, so I maybe I'm going somewhere that you don't go. But I'm going to ask you this question. If I have volunteers that I'm leading, if I have a team, how do I effectively shepherd and lead that team so I don't lose that team? Are we going to get there in the book?
Oh, that's good. Not really.
No?
Which is funny because, two reasons. One, I would say that a lot of things in the book are designed that if you can build this healthy system and strategy, people aren't going to leave, because a lot of these elements go to that. But the other reason is because some friends of mine, Darren Kaiser and Christine Kreischer, wrote a great book called Stop Recruiting, Start Retaining, all about volunteer retention. And so part of me felt like there's a great resource out there on that, which I know that's a thing where it's like you should always write a book, even if there's one out there. But in my mind, I thought that could have been like another 2 or 3 chapters. But I was like, why do that when there's a better resource? But we could certainly talk about it. I think, because some parts of the book certainly do get at that. I think a lot of times you lose people because of a bad culture. And we talked about that, unhealthy culture. I think unclear expectations is another way we lose people. Like, hey, we said the role was this, and then it turned out to be huge, and it was this, or we said the role was this, and it's not that it's a bigger role, but you're not sure what's supposed to be happening here, and so every week you leave feeling like you lost. Like that didn't feel like a good day. You know what I mean? Whatever that ministry is, like you're missing deadlines on the comm side, or something's not working right. Nobody likes that feeling. It'd be like if you were the preacher, and every preacher knows you got messages where like that was a dud, and then of course with preaching, it's funny because sometimes it's like that changed somebody's life, but you don't want that every Sunday. No team wants to leave feeling like, did we do well? Did that work? That felt like a failure. So I think healthy culture, clear expectations, but then the other element that is talked about in the book, but not in a large capacity, is probably care. Are we, and the structure section of the book actually gets at that. It's the idea that if you have more than 10 volunteers, you probably need a structure where some volunteers are leading other volunteers. And I'll tell you one story as an example of this. We've had that for years because I've learned that from some great mentors like Jim Weidman. We didn't have it in the beginning, but a few years in, we started putting in a structure of volunteer coaches who led other volunteers. And it was great. It was so helpful. We were able to have 150 volunteers. And, they didn't all report to one person, you know what I mean? They reported to coaches who reported to a director. And then those volunteer directors reported to me. Well, years down the road, we've got multiple staff and kids at this point. We've got this volunteer kid room, which is a popular thing in some children's ministries where, like, if you're a volunteer and your kid's there for 2 services, they can go to the volunteer kid room for the other service. And it's just fun. Like they go to the kids ministry in the one service, they go to that kid room. Well, we've had different volunteers lead in there because it was kind of like an additional item, which comms directors understand this. Like a lot of the volunteers you have, where do they fit cleanly? It's going to be tough. Like that could be video and that could be social media. So like, how do they all work together? Well, that didn't fit cleanly under any of our coaches because our coaches were small group leader coaches or large group leader coaches. There was no such thing as like a volunteer kids room coach. You know what I mean? So what happened was the staff person was leading that team directly. Well, like you would expect, they got lots of things going on. And so they weren't leading that group of volunteers really well. They weren't meeting with them one-on-one like they're supposed to. And that's not just their fault. That's just how all of us do because it feels lower on the priority. Anyway, our short-term solution was let's go ahead and put that person under the coach who leads in elementary at that service. It's not clean, but at least they'll have somebody to care for them. First 2 weeks, the coach does a great job, has a one-on-one, meets with her, finds out that her dad had just passed away 2 weeks earlier. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. Partially because she's introverted and she just wasn't one of the things she's going to go tell people. Partially because she hadn't maybe really established a great relationship maybe with the other leaders in the room, but mainly because nobody was there to care and know. And so putting him in that position and him using his strengths and meeting with her was so needed. And that could have totally gotten missed and probably has been missed in other ways. Yeah. So I think that care, and it doesn't have to be you. That's the difference. Like if you're the comms director and you've got lots of volunteers, which obviously probably isn't most comms directors, but as you build it, be thinking about how am I meeting with people one-on-one, not about comms. How are you doing? What's going on in your life? How's your son's soccer team doing? How's your relationship with God? What are you praying about lately? Like those kinds of things, the way I say it is like refill the tank, for people that helps them stick for the long haul. So I think those are some ideas.
That's so good. What percentage it's pretty, so for children's ministries, student ministries, what percentage of their time should be focused on focusing on the volunteers?
Oh, good question. I would say 80. Like I'll go high, real high. Like I don't think it's that high actually for most people, because if you think like take a children's minister, for example, now there's different versions. If your church is 5,000, that's different than, if you're 500, but if you're a church of 500, 100 kids, you're the children's pastor, maybe you've got 40, 50 volunteers or something like that. And some people see the numbers are funny to share because somebody's listening going, I wish I had that many volunteers. And somebody else is like going, I got double that number of volunteers. Like it all depends on how often they serve. But I think a lot of kids pastors, if they looked at their week, would be like, this chunk of time is meetings, which I understand. Some of that is not our decision. This chunk of time is prepping curriculum. This chunk of time is scheduling volunteers. This chunk of time is getting the large group thing ready. This chunk of time is working on an event. And I think in reality, volunteers get 5%.
Yeah, they get squashed out.
They get an email. They get you talk to them a little bit when you see them. And I think this might sound pie in the sky. 80% might be high just because of the other things you have to do that aren't your decision, meetings and things like that. But 50 to 60 for sure. Yeah. And then here's where it gets even more healthy, I think, but also complicated, is if you were the children's pastor of the church of 100, don't spend 50% of your time with 50 volunteers. Spend 40% of your time with 10 volunteers that are like your leaders. Yeah. And let them spend time with the rest, right? And then you still have time with all of them, but this isn't new. This is kind of like Jesus using 12 disciples and 3 that he focused on more, and then there was a bunch of followers after that. So there's or Exodus 18, right? Moses learns from his father-in-law how to have leaders of 10s and 50s and 100s. So I feel like it's a biblical principle. It's not been hijacked, but it's more popular in the business world, to have structure and things like that. But I feel like it's a biblical thing. And most staff don't spend enough time investing in leading and volunteers. We spend too much time doing. And I'm sure that's true in comms too. And I'm guilty of that. Like when I took that over in our world, my first thought wasn't, who do I need to get? My first thought was, what do I want this to become? What do we need to change or tweak? But quickly, especially with what's on my plate, it was like, oh no, I need some help. So.
Yeah. And you also notice that possibly that stellar volunteer could be the next elder. So just
totally. We have multiple. I have to think real quick off the top of my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 40% probably of our staff came from internal. Actually, that's not true. All but one of our staff was hired from within the church, but 40% of them were like volunteers who became leaders and then coaches and then became staff.
Yeah.
And some of them one of them is an elder now.
That was me.
Yeah. That's it's just healthy, right? It's just biblical.
Well, it's one of those, it is. And it's one of those things that really helps your church maintain a healthy culture because you're hiring people, you're bringing people onto staff who already know and get your culture. One of the things that I was going to point out, we're going to land the plane here in just a minute, but as you were talking about that investment in the volunteers on that personal level, I think, we're in 2023, 3 years ago. We were in the middle of the COVID pandemic at this time. And in many conversations that I had with church members, church leaders, one of the things that was really highlighted in the pandemic was the fact that many ministry leaders were not personally invested in the people that served with them, because as soon as they stopped showing up to do the ministry, the relationships were kind of completely gone. Like all of a sudden, people are watching church from their couch at home, and the staff is putting on whatever they're putting on the video on Facebook or YouTube or church online platform. And all of a sudden, these volunteers who had been there every single week were like invisible. And I think that as a leader, that's got to be a gut check. I know I was guilty of this when I first went into ministry. I went from a corporate job into ministry, and I was so focused on getting the job done that I often neglected the people. I prioritized the production over the people, and I got called out for it once, and it changed a lot for me. It was a very, very humbling moment. I will never forget it. When this guy that I was leading, his wife said to me, "You prioritize the production over people." And I was like, holy smokes, that's the most harsh thing anybody has ever said to me, but it's 100% true.
It could also be
and
true. Yeah.
I had to wear it. And it changed a lot for me in terms of my approach to ministry and the way that I lead people and build teams now. Not saying that I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not the hero of the story, but that was a moment of complete humility or humbling or shame. I can't tell you. I felt shame in that moment.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's like a tension to manage too, because it's not terrible production, and we're great at caring for volunteers. It's also not, you know what I mean? Like it's a tension you got to manage and find the just right. And there's, let's just be honest. There's volunteers where it's like, because of what's going on in their life, they are a ministry more than being able to help you as a ministry. And we all have been there. We're all ministries, at some point in most of our life. And so there's also times where it's like, oh yeah, this isn't actually working. This is like going back to the culture thing we mentioned, like you on the team right now, not healthy for this team and for you. And so like that, somebody could look from the outside and say you're prioritizing the production or the ministry over the volunteer. And that's not necessarily true. So that's that tough tension to manage. But you're right. I would say far more often we have leaned on the production, producing content, whatever it is, side, and people have taken a back seat. And it's always it's those people that are volunteers that, should be closest to us, should get some of the best of our time. A lot of times they don't. We take them for granted is probably the way I would say it. And that's not a good thing.
Oh. Well, we better wrap this up, Nick. Just real quick, how can people get their hands on this book?
You have to go to volunteerplaybook.com. It just redirects to a page on my site. That's probably the best way. I mean, you get it on Amazon, and you can, print, digital, Audible. I think you said you were listening to it. Recording that for Audible, by the way, very challenging technically, even for a podcaster like myself who thought I was set, had the gear and the whole thing. But it's out there. And actually, if you get the printer, the Kindle version, you can get a free version of the audio. So if like you just want like a 2-for-1 that way. But the reason I say volunteerplaybook.com is because there's other resources I give away. Supposed to be like if you get the book, you get them, but I don't know how to check that. So they're just all there. So even if you don't buy the book, you can get some of those free resources that go with each chapter.
All right.
Yeah, I do want to mention that is actually part of part of my own personal promo as I've been selling the book for you, and hopefully a few people have bought a copy, is that you have a lot of resources on the website that you refer to in the book. One of the ones that stood out to me was volunteer job descriptions, right? Mm-hmm. Like just some sample job descriptions and other things. So some really great resources for you there. Nick, in addition to serving in your local church and having written a book, you have a podcast and you have some other ministry stuff that you do. Can you just kind of give us a quick flyby on some of that?
Sure. Yeah. I host the Family Ministry podcast. It's been, I think, 7 years now. I've missed more in the last few years than I had earlier. So like the number of episodes doesn't equal 7 years times 52 or whatever, but that's been fun. Kids ministry, student ministry, family ministry overall. Like I get to it kind of goes against the idea that you should have like a real focused audience on your podcast, but I love it. So that's like my world. So I love that we get to talk teenagers one week and preschool and then parents and, bounce around. And then we started a a company called Ministry Boost about 5 years ago. This course was the beginning actually of Ministry Boost. It was the first course before it was ever a book, because it was easier to make a course than it was to make a book, by the way. And ministryboost.org, we have 30 courses, a bunch of resource bundles, and some of the resource, like when you get some of the resources in the book, you're actually using our course platform to get access to some of that. And it's kind of funny because the book, one of my business partners that owns Ministry Boost with me he and I were talking about it. There's probably like 7 courses represented in the book. Like there's certain chapters where that's a course by itself, and that's a course by itself. And then there's like those 4 chapters are a course. And so that's been kind of fun, to see them be courses, but then also the book. And now I've created a new course called Volunteer Leadership that kind of gets at whatever remaining content wasn't already a course. And people learn different ways. So I'm just excited. I was really excited about the book because I feel like, courses cost more money. That's one way people learn, but a lot of people love to learn through books. It's cheaper, have a better reach. And I just want as many church leaders as possible to be able to build healthy volunteer teams. So I'm excited that it's out there finally after 10 years.
Yeah. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you and your ministry and helping so many people, and keep up the good work, right? Don't let up at all.
Yeah. Well, hopefully maybe if I'm going to write another book, not take 10 years. Thank you for what you all do. I'm a big evangelist for missional marketing. I talk about you to everybody, especially, there's so many churches that are not leveraging digital.
Yeah.
Some like not well at all, but some are, like I would say with social media or their website. But then there's that whole other world that you guys help with, that you have done tremendous work for us for. Actually, you guys will like this story. This is funny. At my end of year review last year, one of the questions we asked, so I had to answer this question to my pastor. What is your biggest contribution to the church the last year? My answer was helping our digital strategy reach more people online through our website and get more visitors. And I said, I hesitated to put this because it's hard to measure. Like you guys know, you can measure the clicks on the website and all that, but it's hard to know exactly how many of these people showed up or watched online or whatever. But you can measure some things. And so in my mind, you helped us really grow that. And we did see some success from it. We get people all the time now. How'd you find us? Google, website, that is growing. Like invited from another person is still probably the biggest, but man, it's one's shrinking while the other one's growing. And so anyway, he thought that was funny because he just doesn't live in this world. He thought for sure I'd have picked something else on the list, but I was like, hey, maybe it's not, but like if it's working even a fraction of what I think it is, you're talking about that many more people through the doors every week as we're trying to help people find the way back to God. I don't think there is anything, that's been more significant last year. But for someone like him that doesn't live in that world, he just thought that was kind of funny. Like, are you sure? You sure it wasn't like, I don't know, like this over here, or, something more tangible or whatever? And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't know. But if this is working like a little bit like I think it is, this might have been the biggest factor. And of course, you guys were a huge part of it. So thanks.
Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Speaking of being evangelists for missional marketing, if you're listening to this podcast or you're watching on our YouTube channel, we'd love for you to give us a thumbs up on YouTube, leave us a comment. And if you haven't left a rating or review wherever your favorite podcasting platform is, make sure that you do that. You know how the algorithms of the interwebs work, and that will help more people find the content. So share it with somebody. Maybe you need to share it with your pastor or your executive pastor or other volunteer leaders or ministry leaders in your church. We appreciate Nick. We appreciate those of you who have tuned into this week's episode. And with that, we're out of here.
Thanks, guys.